Thousands of people will go into the bush this summer to cut the high cost of living. A man who gets his 2 weeks' salary while he's on vacation should be able to put those 2 weeks in fishing and camping and be able to save 1 week's salary clear. He ought to be able to sleep comfortably every night, to eat well every day, and to return to the city rested and in good condition. But if he goes into the woods with a frying pan, an ignorance of black flies and mosquitoes, and a great and abiding lack of knowledge about cookery, the chances are that his return will be very different. He will come back pocked with mosquito bites, his digestion will be wrecked after a valiant battle to assimilate half-cooked or charred grub, and he won't have had a decent night's sleep the whole time he's been gone. He will solemnly raise his right hand and inform you that he has joined the grand army of never-agains. The call of the wild may be all right, but it's a dog's life. He's heard the call of the tame with both ears. Waiter, bring him an order of milk toast.
A coworker of mine invited me to get out of the city one weekend and go camping with him and a few other guys. The idea was that we drive out to the hunting lease, park the truck, and hike a little ways down the trail with a few cases of liquor and beer. One of the guys said that there was a clearing a little ways off where you could see for miles. We were about halfway up to the top when we all started to smell something rotten. It was pitch black, except for the beams of our headlamps, but they didn't offer too much visibility, just looked straight ahead. We looked along the ground for a dead animal, maybe a deer carcass? Even more creepy, when the breeze kicked up, we could hear a faint squeaking noise. We assumed this was just the noises trees make when they sway in the wind, but it was unnerving. It didn't bother us enough to turn back. We were full of liquid courage after all, and kept going. And we sat up there nursing beers until the sun started coming up. When we turned to hike back, we could see the woods in the morning light. The smell of rot was still there in the same stretch of the trail. And now that we could see where we were going, we again started looking for the source of the smell, and then we saw it, hanging by a rope in a tree about 2 or 3 meters off the trail. It was a man in a dark business suit. Suicide. We called the police, and when they got there, they said that judging from the state of him, he must have been hanging there for 3 days. 3 days at least.
In the first place, he overlooked the insects. Black flies, no-see-ums, deer flies, gnats, and mosquitoes were instituted by the devil himself to force people to live in cities where he could get at them better. If it weren't for them, everybody would live out in the bush and he'd be out of work. It was a rather successful invention. There are a lot of different dopes out there that'll counteract the pests. The simplest, perhaps, is oil of citronella. 2 bits worth of this purchased at any pharmacist's will be enough to last for 2 weeks in the worst fly and mosquito-ridden country. Rub a little on the back of your neck, your forehead, and your wrists before you start fishing, and the black flies and skeeters will shun you. The odor of citronella is not offensive to people. It smells like gun oil, but the bugs do hate it. Put a little on the mosquito netting that covers the front of your pup tent or canoe tent at night, and you won't be bothered.
A few years ago, I was doing a solo-through hike of the AT. I started at a trailhead in Georgia, but only got as far as Damascus, thanks to an ankle injury. That's a story for another time. It was September, and I was on my way to a shelter on a secluded section of the trail between northern North Carolina and southwest Virginia. I'm not going to say which shelter it was because I don't think anybody should go back there. I was hiking faster and more recklessly than I normally would because I was trying to get to the shelter before some severe weather moved in. Several times on my way to the shelter, I noticed a figure standing up on a ridge. A man. He was always positioned so that he was backlit by the sun, and I couldn't make out his features or what he was wearing. He was just a dark figure, looking down on me from the top of a rise. Figured he was a day hiker or another through hiker, or maybe even a nature photographer. In retrospect, I had noticed he wasn't wearing a backpack or carrying any gear, which would have been a red flag if I wasn't in such a damned hurry. The closer I got to the shelter, the more trash I noticed along the trail. Dirty, discarded plastic bottles, strips of fabric caught on trees and sticker bushes, scraps of notepaper even, stuff like that. Normally, I would try to pick up any litter I saw, but again, I was in a hurry. I got to the shelter and saw it was so run down that I'd rather take my chances weathering the storm in my tent than risk disturbing an animal nest inside the shelter. I set up my tent in a location where the shelter would shield me from the wind when the storm arrived. I also rigged up a tarp over the tent to act as sort of a rainfly. I left my pack and my boots just outside the tent. Remember, the tarp was there to keep the rain off, and cozied up in my sleeping bag. Dinner that night was a Cliff Bar. Because I'd planned on dozing off listening to the rain and thunder, I'd left my phone and headphones in my pack. Other hikers rag on me for packing big, heavy, can-style headphones instead of light, compact earbuds. I'm a light sleeper, especially in the woods, and they're really good at canceling out background noise. In the morning, I went in my bag and got out my phone to listen to some Rage Against the Machine to help me wake up. When I put on my headphones, though, I felt something tickling my ear. I thought I'd just gotten my hair stuck in my headphones, and then I felt it again. I took off my headphones, and the biggest fucking spider I'd ever seen in my life crawled out. Thankfully, it scurried out of the tent and didn't hide in any of my stuff. I packed up quick and started to hightail it out of there. As I was leaving, I saw a piece of notebook paper, similar to the kinds I'd seen littering the trail, nailed to the outside of the wooden shelter. I would have noticed it the day before. It had to have been nailed up overnight. It was a note. It said, "Next time, it will be a black widow, bitch. This was your only warning." Had the man I'd seen on the trail been stalking me? Had he planted that spider in my headphones? I got out of there in a hurry. I filed a report with the U.S. Forest Service and with the police, but nothing ever came of it.
To be well rested and get any benefit out of a vacation, one must get a good night's sleep every night. The first requisite for this is to have plenty of cover. It is twice as cold as you expect it will be in the bush 4 nights out of 5, and a good plan is to take double the bedding that you think you will need. An old quilt that you can wrap up in is as warm as 2 blankets. Nearly all outdoor riders rhapsodize over the browse bed. It's all right for the man who knows how to make one and has plenty of time. But in a succession of one-night camps on a canoe trip, all you need is level ground for your tent floor and you'll sleep all right if you have plenty of covers under you. Take twice as much cover as you think you will need, and then put 2/3 of that under you. You'll sleep warm and get your rest. When it's clear weather, you don't need to pitch a tent. If you're only stopping for the night, drive 4 stakes at the head of your made-up bed and drape your mosquito bar over that. Then you can sleep like a log and laugh at the mosquitoes.
When I was young and stupid, I went camping inside the Burren National Park in northern County Clare. I was stealth camping because camping of any kind is strictly forbidden in the Burren, and if I'd been caught, it would have meant a world of trouble for me. If you don't know about the Burren, it's one of the most unique places to visit in the whole of Ireland. In the whole of the world, actually. It's full of craggy rocks and heather and has been described as this otherworldly, almost lunar sort of landscape. And for that reason, hiding there is very difficult indeed. I'd set my tent up against a rock formation out in the middle of nowhere. From that vantage point, I could see for miles. There was no one about, just my dog Chester and me. I had just dozed off in my sleeping bag when I heard Chester making this deep, low growl. I unzipped the tent and looked out. There was a child about 12 to 14 years old, off in the distance. He was all alone walking towards me. I was afraid he was lost or in trouble. After all, no one was allowed to be camping out here. So I approached to see if he needed help. When I got as close as 10 meters from him, Chester panics and starts barking like an animal at bay, teeth bared, tail tucked, hugging the ground. Chester never behaved like that. I normally joke that if I were ever robbed, he'd beg the robbers for pets and a treat. I had to drag Chester on his leash to get any closer. I approached the boy to apologise for my dog and to offer my help if he needed it. But the boy just sort of ignored me. Didn't speak. He just gave me this vacant stare, slowly tilting his head to one side. Then he just kept walking in the same direction as before. Chester freaked out again, and I got down on one knee to try and calm him down. When I looked back up, I saw that the kid was gone. Remember, this was like camping on the moon. You could see for miles. There was no way this boy could have gotten out of my sight so quickly. Many of my more spiritual friends are absolutely certain that Chester was protecting me from an evil spirit.
The average Joe's idea of cooking is to fry everything and fry it good and plenty. Now, a frying pan is a most necessary thing to any trip, but you also need the old stew kettle and the folding reflector baker. A pan of fried trout can't be bettered, and they don't cost any more than ever, but there's a good way and a bad way of frying them. The beginner puts his trout and his bacon in and over a brightly burning fire. The bacon curls up and dries into a dry, tasteless cinder, and the trout is burned outside while still raw on the inside. He eats them, and it's all right if he's only out for one day and going home to a good meal that night. But if he's going to face more trout and bacon the next morning, he is on the pathway to nervous dyspepsia. The only proper way to cook is over coals. Have several cans of Crisco or one of the vegetable shortenings along that are as good as lard. Put the bacon in, and when it's about half cooked, lay the trout in the hot grease, dipping them in cornmeal first. Then put the bacon on top of the trout, and it will baste them as it slowly cooks. Coffee can be boiling at the same time, and in a smaller skillet, pancakes being made that are satisfying the other campers while they're waiting for the trout. Apple butter, maple syrup, or cinnamon and sugar go well with the cakes. The trout are crisp outside and firm and pink inside, and the bacon is well done, but not too done. If there is anything better than that combination, this writer has yet to taste it in a lifetime devoted largely and studiously to eating.
My older brother loved to go out fishing just about every weekend, rain or shine. We lived out in the middle of nowhere with nothing to do. He could drive and I couldn't, so sometimes I'd just go along with him as an excuse to get out of the house. Mama and Daddy used to get on my damn nerves when I was 13, 14. One weekend we were out and Wes, that's my brother, was fishing this creek not far from where the creek emptied into the lake. The clouds were black and the wind picked up. Pretty soon it started to thunder and we started to pack it in for the day. We could see clear out to the far end of the lake and this little dirt road that went winding along the shoreline. Pretty soon we see an old beater of a pickup truck come rolling along that dirt road. The storm picked up fast and lightning struck a tree that fell over into the road. That old truck swerved but didn't really have anywhere to go and ended up slamming into the tree. Not 5 seconds passed before we see flames licking up from under the hood of the truck. So we throw our gear into our truck and drive out there as fast as we can to see if this guy needs help. We hauled ass over there, looking for a downed tree and a flaming truck, but we didn't see a thing. No truck, no flames, not even a tree in the road, nothing. Then the rain came, and it rained so hard, we thought that little dirt road would be washed out. On our way back home, Wes stopped at a little bait shop a couple of miles from the lake and told the owner what we'd seen. The old guy just laughed and said, "Oh, you saw Herb. Back in 1977, old Herb was driving around the lake in a storm. Lightning struck a tree and wrecked him, pinning him in the truck. The truck burned up with him in it before anybody ever found him. Every now and then, whenever it storms on the lake, nice folks like you might see him. I guess Herb never wants to be forgotten."
In the baker, mere man comes into his own, for he can make a pie that, to his bush appetite, will have it all over the product that Mother used to make. All there is to a pie is 1.5 cups of flour, 1/2 teaspoonful of salt, 1/2 cup of lard and cold water. That, friend, will make pie crust to bring tears of joy into your camping partner's eyes. Mix the salt with the flour, work the lard into the flour, make it up into a good dough with cold water. Then roll it out with whatever kind of round bottle you prefer, like that bottle of hooch you've been concealing. Cut out a piece of the rolled out dough big enough to line a pie tin. I like the kind with holes in the bottom. Then you put in your dried apples that have soaked all night and been sweetened, or your apricots, or your blackberries, and then take another sheet of your dough and drape it gracefully over the top, soldering it down at the edges with your fingers. Put it in the baker with a good slow fire for 45 minutes, then take it out. And if your pals are Frenchmen, they'll kiss you. The penalty for knowing how to cook is that others will make you do all the cooking.
Not long ago, I convinced my girlfriend to go on a 3-day hiking trip through Cherokee National Forest on some of the more obscure and least traveled trails. She's a more experienced hiker than I am, especially when it comes to backcountry and off-trail hikes. She wasn't crazy about some of the trails I had planned to take. She tried to convince me to hike on trails frequented by more tourists and day hikers. Now I wish I'd listened to her. About a mile in, I could feel the woods closing in on us, enough to feel completely isolated. On the first morning after breaking camp, we started to notice a lot of little bones along the trail. That's not all that unusual, but we started to see them everywhere. I don't remember what we were thinking. Reading it on paper and knowing what happened next, that should have been our signal to turn around and go back. For whatever reason, we decided it made more sense to keep hiking the way we were going. By about noon, it seemed like the trail was practically paved with these little bones. Then we walk around this bend in the trail and find a fully nude man crouching in the middle of the trail. I looked around the edges of the trail when I saw him, expecting to see a pile of clothes or gear. Nothing, though. He had a long beard and an unkept rat's nest for hair. It looked like he hadn't bathed in his entire life. He was crunching on something. The three of us sort of stood and stared at one another for a full minute, like deer staring into headlights. Then he bolted away from the trail so fast that the wilderness just seemed to swallow him up. And this was miles and miles from any kind of civilization. We took a few moments to gather our wits and took a few long breaths. Then we walked over to the spot where he'd been crouched. There in the dirt was this old, crumpled aluminum pie tin. And inside were the remains of a partially eaten stray cat.
It's all right to talk about roughing it in the woods, but the real woodsman is the man who can be really comfortable in the bush.
Hello, my name is Keely, and I am the host of a paranormal and true crime podcast. On my podcast, Missy Mysteries, I take a special focus on unsolved and missing persons cases. When I started my podcast, it was solely for the fact that I wanted to help people whose stories have not been shared. Over the year I have had it, it has evolved to be so much more, even adding a paranormal side. With the addition to a paranormal side, each week I cover a different topic. One week it will be an unsolved or a missing person, and the next week it will be a paranormal topic. Sometimes these blend together and will be two-parters where I cover the crime and the haunting in places such as Bobby Mackey's Music World, Felicia Ack's Murder House, the Amityville House, Lizzie Borden's home. If any of these sound like topics you would like to listen to, please check out Misty Mysteries anywhere where you listen to your favorite podcasts. And I really do hope to see you next week on my podcast, Misty Mysteries.
Do you ever wonder why on just random days you're just in a really crappy mood all day long?
I'm always in a crappy mood all day long.
Well, there's a very good reason for that. On our podcast, A Date with Murder, we are going to break down what horrible true crime event happened on this date in history. Join me, I'm Kelly.
And I'm Ashley.
As we go on this depressing but sometimes hilarious journey together. Find us wherever you get your podcasts.
Amen. That's all I got.
We have a podcast here that might provide that answer for you. It's called, what is that banging in the background?
My cat's eating. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. She can't hear you. And how did he even get a hold of the refrigerator shelves?
About a year ago, everything changed. If you're a survivor, then that means there's a chance that we're still alive, and if you're listening to this, can contact me on the frequency 14.060. I'm not sure if you've been told the story of what happened, but suddenly the world was devastated by abnormal weather conditions. But by far the most devastating was the eruption of several of the world's supervolcanoes. The ash blew into the sky, not only plunging us into a continuous cold, but leaving the world blanketed in darkness. Sit back and let me tell you the story of what came out of the ashes.
Out of the Ashes is a epic, dark, modern fantasy podcast. Available now on your favorite podcatcher of choice. You can also visit us at outoftheashespodcast.com.
I'm Edward October. For more true-ish, and classic tales of horror and the paranormal, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to ring the bell so you don't miss anything. Or find all of our links at octoberpodvhs.com. Octoberpod, retro horror for bold individualists.